the paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Well, hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
How's your afternoon been? I know that you were involved in like a meditation workshop or something today, right?
Oh, I just had to do one real quick for my class that I'm taking.
How did that go?
Not good. I'm going to do it again.
Uh-huh.
I'm under a lot of stress, so it didn't work out too well.
Well, it's always a stressful time of year in the holidays.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I agree with that one.
But we're rolling into the Christmas season, which I'm excited about. So
yes, you've already got it all set up. I don't have any Christmas behind me yet. I still got Halloween.
That's because I'm like, I don't know, not the Grinch. You're like the Grinch when it comes to Christmas. I'm joking. You love Christmas. I'm totally teasing. You're a big Christmas gal. Did you get your tree up yet this year?
Oh, it's been up for like 2 weeks.
Exactly. You beat me to the tree, see?
So, yeah.
Just not to the studio setup.
No.
That's all right. You've probably been busy. But anyway, we should be rolling into what's probably more entertaining for our audience than you and I talking about our Christmas decorations. And that's tonight's guest. He's a psychic medium who also has a master's degree in forensic psychology from the University of Florida. In 1980, along with 4 other psychologists, he interviewed Ted Bundy when Bundy was on death row. Having had his first paranormal experiences as a 4-year-old child, he has gone on to have been involved with multiple paranormal investigations, including exorcisms, sanctioned by the Catholic Archdiocese in Chicago, and he's worked as a past life regression therapist. He also volunteers at a children's hospice to help young children cross over into paradise. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show, Robert Righi.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Greeting, Robert.
Thank you for having me on this podcast. Looking forward to this so very much.
So am I. There's just your bio. There's so much ground to cover just in that. And I'm normally Jen likes to start off by asking a little bit about you, but I have to jump just quickly straight into Bundy. Tell me a little bit about your experiences with Ted Bundy. Good grief, how could I leave that on the table?
Everybody wants to jump into Bundy. Everyone does. It happened in 1980. I attended the University of Florida, where I received a master's degree in forensic psychology and clinical social work. The criminal mind has always been fascinating to me. Prior to that, I did many internships at different state hospitals around. And being in those state hospitals, I saw how our brothers and sisters were treated and such like that. I saw horrifying things within those state hospitals. I also did an internship at the only leprosy colony here in the United States, and it was in Louisiana. So we can go into that later. But the forensic part of psychology has always interested me. I knew that in time, my angels told me, in time, that forensics would be the thing to get into. And so I did. The clinical social work part of me, I have always been interested in helping our brothers and sisters in need. Always have been and always will, because God calls me home. And this time when I die this time, that's it. I'm not coming back. I have always lived my lives. I have learned the lesson of life. And thank God I won't have to come back again. So that's another story in itself. Right before I graduated, and I took 2 extra years at the University of Florida because I wanted to know more about anatomy and physiology, right? And so I took 2 more years of study and such. And so I had written to I had talked to my director of psychology and said, I would like to interview Ted Bundy, who was only 50 miles north of Gainesville, where he was on death row. And he said, that's never happened before, but if you want to, go for it. And so I wrote to Ted, and I wrote to his lawyer and to the warden there. And 2 weeks later, to my surprise, I received a letter from Ted, a handwritten letter that I have to this day, several letters from him, and agreeing for me to come in to where he was at, and for a 90-minute interview. And other psychologists with me, because there's a reason why, and I can go into that later. But anyhow, I was really shocked. I was surprised, but my angels always said, always rely on them, and I did. And but anyhow, and so 2 weeks later, we went to his prison. We got there, and we were waiting in a room, and about 30 minutes later, the door opened. Here walks in Bundy with 3 security guards. He was shackled, and he came in and he sat down on a chair. We were only 5 feet apart from each other. To be in that same room, I felt, being a psychic medium, I felt the heaviness as he was walking closer and closer to the room. I am Italian and Spanish, so I use my hand, you know what I mean? Because I couldn't talk if I didn't, you know? So I used my hands a lot. And so anyhow, so Ted came into the room, and there was a heaviness that came into the room. The other psychologists never felt it, but I felt it. Bundy sat down in the chair. He said hello to us. He was very engaging. But again, you must realize that he was very manipulative, very charismatic. He's not stupid. By no means is he stupid. Okay? So when he sat down, we introduced ourselves. He kind of ignored me in the very beginning, because when he looked at me, his eyes were completely darkened. Looked like it was looking into the eyes of death. There was nothing behind his eyes at all. Now, the other psychologists never saw that. What experienced that? So Ted sits down, and we introduce ourselves. We're talking with each other. There were 3 female psychologists. One wore a very tight sweater. She was very busty, as they say, okay? And there was a reason why these women wore the clothing that they did. It was to entice Bundy. And again, he understood that when he saw what these women were wearing. The other psychologist was wearing a work suit, very professional looking and such like that. And the other psychologist was wearing gym clothes, gym sweatshirt, you know what I mean, and that type of thing. And the other psychologist was a male who was sitting next to me. We were dressed up. You have to realize this was in the 80s, okay? Living in South Florida, everything was pastel colors, just like in Miami Vice. Enough to remember Miami Vice in the 80s with Don Johnson, and they were wearing all this clothing and stuff, right? Anyhow, so that's what I was dressed in. And so the interview began, and he wanted to know our names, and then, you know, he already knew who I was by the letters and such. And so the ladies introduced themselves, and then the gentlemen did, and then I began to ask them questions. Now, what I wanted to know was the dark side of Ted. Only one documentary, my brothers and sisters who are listening to this and watching this, there was only one time when he mentioned about the dark side, about the evil one, and that's it. I wanted to know more about that. I wanted to know who his mentor was. I wanted to know how he got into the dark side of things and such like that, okay? The other psychologist asked about his education, asked about different things. But me specifically, it was the side of the paranormal, let's say, okay? And so I began asking him questions. The other psychologists were kind of nervous. And so we talked before that. I said, don't be nervous at all, because Bundy is so primal. He will pick up on that nervousness. He will pick up on your energy also. So just kind of relax. If you have to smoke a joint before that, that's fine. Just relax, whatever. Have a couple of beers or cocktails before we go and interview him, just to relax yourself. Well, they were nervous anyhow. And he picked up on that right away. My friends who are listening to this, to be within 5 feet of a serial killer who give two shits about anything, you know what I mean? He had no respect for women, none whatsoever.
Did you?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. So when you asked him those paranormal type questions, did you feel any reaction from him?
Even before that, when I spoke to him, his eyes went very dark. They looked like walnuts. When he talked to the other psychologists, they did not notice his eyes, but his eyes changed for them completely. He was very engaging. He was a very handsome man, very, very handsome, very narcissistic also, okay? I felt and saw things that the other psychologists never did. Never. One thing about this interview is that we were not allowed to bring any writing material, and we could not videotape it or record it. Nothing like that whatsoever. And so my experience with Bundy was totally different than the other psychologists. Totally different. But Ted was born in 1946 in a shelter for women, for unwed women who were pregnant. Now, this is 1946. So when he was born, his mother's name is Eleanor Louise Caldwell, and she went by the name of Louise, okay? She decided to keep her son, Ted. She decided to keep him. But on the birth certificate, it was stamped bastard, because that's what they did. That's what they did. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what they did during that time. If you were unwed, your birth certificate, if the father wasn't there, was never mentioned, such like that, it was just stamped bastard. Okay? And that's a hell of a thing to see as a child, if you were shown your birth certificate and such. Louise. So Louise decided to keep her child. They moved to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is where Louise was from. And so they stayed with her parents, Ted's grandparents. Well, Ted's grandparents adopt him. And that's strange in itself, too. And things just started to go into the abyss early in his life. He did well in school. He was tested 136, and that is within the gifted range. Okay, but Ted he went into weird things, like he began to steal, he began to lie, began to do a lot of things, right? And so his mother thought that it would be better to get him out of Pennsylvania and take him to the Pacific Northwest. It is just bizarre how she even picked the Pacific Northwest. She didn't know what at all, none whatsoever. But she wanted to get away from the East Coast. So her little Teddy, as she called him, he hated that name. In fact, I called him Teddy, and he said, "You called me Mr. Bundy." He was saying that to me, to call him Mr. Bundy. The ladies could call him Ted, but the other gentleman and myself had to call him Mr. Bundy. But anyhow, so they moved to the Pacific Northwest, and he's older now. And his cousins come from Philadelphia, and they visit with him, and they were outside playing and such. And now Mr. Bundy, or Teddy, is telling all of us these things. And he said that my cousin told me that my grandfather could be my father. He never knew that. He never knew his father whatsoever. And he said, and then he goes, "My grandfather's really my father?" And that didn't make any sense to him whatsoever. Also, his cousin told him, do you know who your sister is? And he said, no. They said, your sister is your mother. Louise, the woman who had him, was his sister.
Mm.
He never knew that. Okay, so all this betrayal, all these lies start like racking up on him, layering him and such like that. He does horribly, well, his behavior was horrible in school. He began to lie and do all sorts of things. He began to steal in stores and such like that. And so the other psychologists wanted to ask questions, so they began to ask him questions about other things. But again, my main point was the paranormal side or the dark side of him, okay? So after the female psychologist, and he could have stayed on those female psychologists to really enticed by them whatsoever. He really was. He didn't give two shits, like I said, about the other psychologist and myself. He just wanted to see these beautiful women, okay? So then I asked Mr. Bundy how he got into, let's say, the dark side. And he looked at me and he goes, Robert, I know who you are. I sense who you are, and I sense what you do. And he said, you will never forget this interview with me, because I will always be with you in one way or another. That sent chills down my spine to hear that. You know, the female psychologist went, oh no, so they reacted to it. I didn't react to that. But let me tell you that when I do these interviews, because Ted wants me to tell his story that he did, I am not justifying what he did whatsoever. I'm not. He's a narcissist when he was alive, and he's a narcissist in the grave. He is. Don't be surprised if this goes haywire or if this StreamYard stops, freezes up, because when I talk about Bundy, a lot of things happen. Okay? I do have two angels with me, and they do protect me as much, they do truly protect me. Okay? And so anyhow, talking to Ted, and he was Mr. Bundy, but I'll call him Ted just to piss him off, okay? But anyhow, and so I was talking to Teddy, and he hated that, especially when I called him that. But anyhow, I asked him how he got into whatever. And he said that early on, he began to play with the Ouija board. Now, my brother and sisters in the paranormal field, I don't. I think life is a portal as it is, correct? I stay away from that. So I stay away from that completely. But he said he wanted to see if he could conjure demons. He wanted to confront a demon. He wanted to see the face of a demon. And how ironic that is, he's to see the face of a demon when he can look into a mirror and see the true demon within himself, right? Mm-hmm. So what he began to do was he got a Ouija board. This was like we call it middle school now. But anyhow, he got into the Ouija board. He began to kill little animals. He would put the animals on the Ouija board itself and begin to dissect it on the Ouija board. It was like a sacrifice to the demon. And he was very upset with this, very matter of fact. Now, during this time also in middle school, when he started this stuff, he started to openly masturbate in school, outside, wherever. He was raised in a very, very Methodist, strict church. And so they would go to church on Sunday for hours and on Wednesday and some, church camp, which he hated. And what he would do, he would masturbate on Sunday morning on the choir gown of the women. Again, power and control. Okay. So the thing this way is that he was lied to in the very beginning of his early life, who his father was, who his father wasn't, and such like that, right? And when he went to his mother and asked her, "Are you my sister?" Louise said, "Yes, I'm your sister besides your mother." And that whole betrayal, it just got him down into the abyss even more. Ouija board, killing little animals, and getting into that real dark place. He told all of us that during the time that he was using the Ouija board, he did experience demons. And so I wanted him to go further into that. And so he did. He talked about these demons that would come through the board. Of course, he was drinking and he was high too, okay? And he had other friends with him at the time when he was using the Ouija board, but Ted got so outrageous with the board that his friends got scared of what the board was doing. He told us that he didn't have to use the planchette at all. It moved on its own. That's why my brothers and sisters in the paranormal field who are watching this, I believe Ted Bundy was truly, truly possessed. I think that he was born predestined to become possessed and to become a murderous, heinous person that he did. And so he was telling me about the Ouija board. The other psychologists were asking him other questions and such like that. And he looked at me again, and he began to sweat. I could see, psychically, I could see him sweat when he was speaking to me. Now, the other psychologists never saw that whatsoever. But I could feel that, and I saw that. And I asked Teddy, I said, "Mr. Bundy," I said, "who is your mentor?" And he said his mentor was Ed Gein. You know who Ed Gein is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he lived down the road from me. Plainfield isn't that far from where I live.
Yes, Ed Gein. I think that the movie, was it Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was loosely based on his life. Yeah.
Yeah, that and Psycho were both influenced, I think, by the Ed Gein story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he really put Ed Gein on a pedestal. He read everything he could about Ed Gein, about how he did the things he did, how he skinned so correctly and such like that. He got off on that. Like I said, being a narcissist and such like that, very charismatic. He also went to university. He wanted to become a psychologist, which he did. And I asked him about that. And I said, "Why did you want to become a psychologist for?" And he said, "Because I wanted to learn how to manipulate women even more." He did. He knew how to manipulate women. He knew how to do things to engage them. He always went on the sympathy mode. He talked about how he got these women to help him. And being a narcissist, the narcissist said to him in the very beginning, narcissism is horrible to have, first of all, because you think the whole world revolves around you instead of you around the world. And also he felt that he was very entitled because of how he was betrayed by his mother, okay? All the women that he killed except for one. Well, there were two women. One woman that he tried to kill, two women, and one of them survived, and she's still alive today. The other young girl was only 12 years old when he murdered her. But all the women that he murdered looked like his mother. What's so ironic about Bundy is that I asked him about the Green River murderer, serial killer that you've heard of, I'm sure, from the Pacific Northwest also. During that time, the Green River murderer was in the Pacific Northwest, yes. Well, Ted was jealous. And so Ted wrote to the police and he gave them information about how to arrest him, what he was going to do next. And so it was Ted Bundy's tip that helped the authorities in the Pacific Northwest to arrest him.
Gosh.
And I asked him about that. Why did you do that? And he said, because that bastard was getting all the good stuff. That's what he thought of women, stock. That's why he turned in the Green River murderer. That's why he helped the police.
Do you think if Ted Bundy had been exorcised earlier in his life, or when whatever entered him, you suggested he was possessed, entered him before he started killing, do you think it could have been averted, the murders?
No. In the first place, Ted would never want that. Never. He never used the word possessed. Never. But the demons that he called in, and I asked him about that also, about the different demons and such, and he named them. I'm not going to name them because it is like a calling card. You know what I mean? So I just leave them. You know? Like I said, and like you said, the Dean, and earlier in my bio that you were reading, that I have been involved in 2 exorcisms that were sanctioned by the Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago.
Yes.
I did not do the exorcists themselves. Father Michael did. We can go into that another story. I was just there to help with prayers and stuff like that, and be with the 2 individuals at 2 different times, because they knew me. Okay, and so that's for another story. And no. Ted had nothing to do with religion after his Methodist experience, none whatsoever. And I have to tell my brothers and sisters who are listening to this, that there is a victim of Teddy that lived on my road here in Peoria, Illinois. And I knew her briefly because I was still in grade school. She was in high school. And back in that time, kids just hitchhiked. Women hitchhiked, girls did. Boy, you know what I mean? People hitchhiked. And nobody thought about it. Nobody thought about, being murdered and stuff like that. A lot of kids were going to California because of the Monterey Pop Festival and those types of things in the 60s with the free love and the hippies and all that, right? And the Northwest was the place to go to. And so this young girl moved down the road from me, graduated from high school, and then she decided to hit the road. And so she hitchhiked from Peoria, Illinois, all the way to the Pacific Northwest, and that's where she met up with Bundy. And how I knew that was later on in life, that I went home for a bit while going to school, and her mom and dad still lived there, and the oldest son came to visit, and he knew that I was in the forensics part at school and such, and so so he came down the road to visit me and such, and he is the one who told me about that his daughter, that his sister was murdered by such. And and to know someone that close, to be murdered that way, and how, like I said, that Ted was such a manipulator that he would be driving in the Pacific Northwest, and one time he wore a cast on his arm, and that's where he had a knife, and the cast was fake. And the first time that he did it, because his narcissism told him, yes, you can do it, and if you do it once, you can do it many, many times. But eventually, in the end, the narcissism will put you in the house, and it will get you caught. And it did with Ted. It truly did, because what happens is you become so sassy, you know what I mean, and so too overconfident and stuff like that you begin making mistakes. Okay, so Bundy is wearing a cast. He pulls over his car, gets out of the car. Now he's telling all of us this, right? And so he's telling all of us this, and so he gets out of the car. He puts up the hood. This people drive by, and this young woman stops. She had all the good intentions to help him. And again, I'm not justifying what this bastard did, because these women's stories need to be told, and that's what he hates the most. When I do these podcasts, he loves for me to talk about the place that I do, but he doesn't want these women to really be talked about. And sometimes, like I've only did like 4 other podcasts talking about Ted Bundy. And a lot of times people will hear the women scream. Now, I've never heard that, but a lot of people have heard the women scream and stuff like that.
Gosh.
And so then anyhow, the woman helps him. The car can't be fixed. Okay. And he's doing this and he's doing that. Now, down the road a bit, where he already knows that he has a cabin there, a shed, right? So he tells this young woman, well, I can possibly maybe fix the car, whatever, but we need to go. I need to be driven down to the shed and brought back. Well, being the caring soul that she is, God bless her soul, you know what I mean? And so he gets her into the shed, hits her with his cap, and she's still alive. He begins to peel his cap off of his arm, and there's a knife. She struggled. She screamed. And what he sexually gets off on is to see the women's faces in terror. It's a control thing with him. Okay? He begins to tear off her clothes. Now, I'm not going to go into detail how he dismembers these women. I'm not going to go into detail because people love gore, but again, that's really glorifying what he did. Okay, and again, these women were innocent victims, innocent, and so I won't be real graphic. But what he did to this woman, he rips off her clothes. He screams. She's asking for help. He's crying, and that's what he loves. That's what he gets off on. He gets a butcher knife that was in his past, and he cuts her nipples off. He also, how much more detail do you want me to go into? Because I can, but it's up to you.
I mean, it sounds like it was a pretty gruesome scene.
Yeah.
It was, but let me say that he also cannibalized some of the women also. And we learned when there's a lot of boys, young men who kill their mothers, who will cannibalize them because their mothers have always been distant to them. So they want to be closer to their mother. So they will cannibalize their mother. And so Ted Bundy cannibalized a lot of these women. Okay. He cut off her nipples. He did eat both of her nipples, and he told us that. And when he's talking, it's just matter of fact. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just like us talking, or Dean, like you talking to Jen. You know what I mean? Just like that. So then he takes off her. He strips her down. She's still alive. She's still alive through this, but she's near death. And that's what he gets off on. Okay. He does have sex with the women, but just right before they die, because he wants them to feel every pain and what he does and how he does it. He gets off on their facial expression. He gets off on their energy of screaming and begging for help. Because inside Ted, all these years, he too was begging for help. And again, I'm not justifying what he did at all. No, whatsoever. But to try to understand why he did the things that he did. Okay. And narcissism will say, okay, you did it one time, Ted, you can do it again and again and again. He did. Now, on record, there's only a certain amount of females that he had murdered. But one of the other psychologists asked him, how many women did you actually murder? And he told us 150. Now, again, that's grandiose, whatever, right? And at the end of his life, that he began to sing like a canary because he wanted to get out. Again, that was a manipulation. That he wanted to get out. He wanted to smell fresh air. He said, listen, I will take you to the places where I have murdered and buried these women. So the authorities said, so they agreed. He did take them to different parts of the country, and yes, they did find bodies and such. But most places that he wanted to see, because he just wanted to see them, right? So he knew how to manipulate the authorities, and he did as well. Finally, the authorities said, enough is enough. And so they brought him back to the prison and such. And so the other women, I asked Bundy, I said, did you ever want to stop doing this? And he said, no, I never wanted to stop. I wanted to kill more women because they deserve it. Because all women are bitches. All women are manipulative. All women are liars. All women are used. And that all stems from his mother lying to him in the very beginning. If Louise would have never lied to him and came out honest with him that, yes, I'm your sister and stuff like that, right? And all that stuff, and your father is so-and-so and everything like that, things could have been different. But it wasn't supposed to be, And so some of the women that he had murdered, and after I spoke to him, after we interviewed him, I connected with some of the women that he murdered. And I asked him, did you try to help some of the women that he was murdering? And several of these beautiful female spirits came to me and was talking to me and said that we are a sisterhood. There's nothing that we could have done to stop Bundy doing what he did, but we were there to take our sisters to heaven. So I can go into more detail about Bundy, but again, I don't want to justify what he did. Because what he did was
you with a rather unique background in both clinical psychology as well as with psyche and with psychic medium abilities. Is that anything have you ever used those things post Bundy to try to solve cold cases or to do any type of psychic profiling of other killers that might be out there?
Yes, being a criminal profiler, there were a lot of cases. Like I would be like, and I did this for 30 plus years for the state of Florida, down in South Beach, which is a beautiful area of Miami, right? And we would be on call. We would be on call once a month. And then I'm going to say that when I got the job with the state director called me in and interviewed me. And he said, Robert, he said, I only have a bachelor's degree in criminology. You have the master's degree in all this internships and such. And you interviewed Ted Bundy. And he said, and he would be a yellow pad. And he said, Robert, I want you to write the protocol and what we need to do within criminal profiling. And, and I'm not better or greater than anyone else, right? Or less than anyone else, right? And so I wrote pages and pages and pages and what we need to do and stuff like that. And even to this day, many, many, many years later, because I'm retired a long time ago. And even today, there are 2 chapters within a book. It's like the 101 when it comes to criminal profiling, that what I have written is still in those books. And so that's one of the accomplishments that I did in my lifetime. Oh, and bless you, Dean. Bless you.
Thank you. I muted my microphone so the audience wouldn't have to hear it.
Okay. And so my director knew what I did. He wanted to see firsthand on how I do the things that I do. He was fascinated with that. And the director was Cuban and I'm Spanish, and so we had that connect. And so we would go to different places, and so he would say what's going on and whatever. And so And I also did many readings with him and his family, and I didn't know them from Adam or Eve, right? I didn't know their personal life, right? But me doing these readings, and a lot of them were on target. Okay, not all psychic mediums, and myself included, we're not 100% right all the time. We're not, and that drives me nuts when I hear these people say, "Well, they're an expert." Please, make me gag. There is no expert within the paranormal field, because the paranormal field is not an absolute science. It's not. You can have 100 mediums or psychics in a room. We will experience 100 different things. Okay. But anyhow, and so he knew what I did. And yes, and I did use my psychic and my mediumship to find different perpetrators and such. But in my report, I could never put that down. I could never say, "Oh, my angels took me here," or whatever. You know what I mean? I could never say that in a report. I had to be very vague. But again, the criminal profiler, we become the victim. We become the victim. We find out where they went to school, what restaurants they went to, who are their family, who are their friends, like what bars did they go to, and such like that. So we become the victim, because becoming the victim, more chances are not, it is going to be a family member, or it's going to be an ex-boyfriend, lover, that type of thing, or an acquaintance. It's very, very seldom that somebody is murdered just randomly. Okay, a lot of murders happen out of passion. Also, I remember getting a call at 2:00 in the morning, and so, like back then, my brothers and sisters who were going to be listening to this, about this, we were not police back then, like they are now on TV and all that stuff. We were not policemen. We never carried a gun, not at all. So, like I said, we were wearing pastels all the time, so we were no policemen and everything. But so we worked very, very closely with the district attorney's office, and also for the state attorney. And so anyhow, when you go, so I was called at 2:00 in the morning, and it was in this garbage bin. And let me tell you that I didn't know if I was looking at a rag doll or a baby. And it had been a baby that was murdered and then set on fire. And somebody asked me, "Robert, how do you deal with all this carnage, all this negativity?" And I said, "I cover myself with white light. I have 2 angels that help me." Do I cry? Of course. After something like seeing a child, and such like that, or a young adult, seeing them dismembered, seeing a hand just sticking out of the ground, right? That I do afterwards, that I do go home and I do cry. I do, because I'm human, And so if I didn't cry, and if I didn't release that energy, it would just build up and build up and build up inside of me. And that's why a lot of detectives end up having heart attacks, and strokes, and become drug addicts and all that other thing, because they have never separated themselves. And so I have, but you know what, there's no better satisfaction, no greater satisfaction than going to a family after we interview them and stuff like that, right? Going to a family and saying, "Ma'am, we have the animal, we have the man or the woman who murdered your loved one. We have arrested. There's no better satisfaction." And so I have learned over all these years to separate myself. It's not been easy, not at all. But I've had to do it just to protect myself. In all these many, many years, I've kept 50 some tablets of reams and reams of paper, about 50 years worth of all my experiences within the paranormal field, and all experiences that I've had in my career. And somebody said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I said, all this documentation is for me. It is for me. It's something that I needed to do. And even in my own private practice, when I also was a criminal profiler, like I said, but also I had my private practice, that I kept records of everything who I spoke to, the time, the date, and such like that, and how I felt before, how I felt afterwards, and such like that. But that is just for only me. And sometimes people want to hear about Bundy and everything. And, for many years, I never talked about this. I didn't. And then my angels said that I should talk about it. Talk about the dark side of Bundy. Because these women's stories need people. They need people. Also, something about Bundy was that 90 minutes were up, right? But during that time, like I said, everything, the energy was changing in the room and things like that, and so 90 minutes went very, very fast. And he stood up, and so we thanked him for his time. And he looked at us and said, "That's all I have is time. That's all I." And then he tried to blow a kiss to the women. And he would wag his tongue out at them and stuff like that.
Oh, God.
Kind of nasty with the women, with the female psychologists. Maybe that's for a different place too. But it's just the fact that when he looked at me, he said, "Robert, you will never forget me. I will always be with you." And let me tell you, for many, many years after this interview, I never talked about it. In the first podcast that I've ever done, I never talked about Ted Bundy. Never did. And then my angel said, "You need to start talking." And I think, and for me personally, I think it's very cathartic for me to do so. I think it's very healing. And so I have been. But I remember when he left the room, he turned around again and said, "Robert, you will never forget your life." He said, "I will always be with you." So I just played it off and stuff like that, right? But on the way home, so he left, and so on the way home, we all drove together. We sat in silence, and so I asked everyone to write down how they felt during the experience with Bundy and stuff like that. And so a week later, we got together. We went to a bar, had a couple of cocktails and such, and we spoke about it then. Okay. Now, during that time, later on, I did write to him again. So I have several letters from him, and also from Jeffrey Dahmer, from the son of Sam, from the person in Wichita, Kansas. So I have all these letters from these guys, Scott Peterson in California. And so I asked Bundy if I could be at his execution, and he agreed. And so I was one of the 42 that were there.
Gosh.
To see him execute. And at the very end of his, when they were about ready to turn on old Sparky, as they called this old electric chair, he looked at us and said, "I want my family to know that I love them. I love all those my friends." And that was it. Not once did that SOB ever apologize. He never apologized for anything. Nothing at all. So I'll never forget, on the day of his execution, it was in 1989. Okay, and so I interviewed him in 1980. So 9 years later, he was at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I remember arriving there, and it was just like, oh my, thousands of people there. Thousands of people were talking, and we're had signs about Bundy, kill the SOB and everything. And then across the street, there were people who were against capital punishment and gun testing.
Yeah.
That there were both sides there, but to be in a room just feet away from his execution, I remember that the minister came in, a Methodist minister of all things, and he hated the Methodist religion with a passion. And so the preacher started to say a prayer, and he told the guy to get the F out. that he did not need prayer whatsoever. So the minister left. And he came in with a shaved head. You know, they had to shave his hair off completely. So here they put, you know, and I don't know if you've ever seen an execution like this, or any execution, but they have your head bald, shaved and such, and then they wet down your head, and they put a sponge there, then you put the electrodes and all this stuff on your head, and then they put a hood. They put a hood over your head, and then they turned on the electricity. The smoke rise from his head, and you saw him shake. And 30 seconds, a minute later, he was gone. But let me tell you, he still walks the earth. He still walks the earth. He's still with us. You know, and very, very soon I will stop talking about him, because the more that I talk about him, the more that gives him power.
Yeah.
You know, but these women's stories need to be told, because these are women. They're somebody's daughters, somebody's granddaughters, okay, somebody's cousin, somebody's sisters, okay? And these women's stories need to be told, because they are the truly innocent victims of all of them. Okay? Ted Bundy did have a daughter named Rose Bundy. She's married now, a very successful life. She has never spoken about her father whatsoever. None whatsoever. She can make millions, you know, just writing a book, being the daughter of Bundy. But she has refused to do that. She's never been on any talk shows, as far as I know. She lives a very, very quiet life. And so that is just some of my time with Ted Bundy.
Gosh, it's quite the contrast from your time interviewing and speaking with Bundy, and then doing other profile criminal work, to what you do now, which is help children, right?
Can you hear him, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay. Because Dean's asking me a question.
Can you hear me now, Robert?
Yeah, now I can, but I did not hear the question. A lot of times that happens. A lot of times that happens when we're talking about Bundy, because he never wants any questions asked. But go ahead, Dean, ask me.
He might be mad because I was changing the topic to end on a cheerier, not a cheerier note, but a lighter note, because it's still very tragic. But I was just saying it must be quite the contrast from communicating with Bundy and following him all the way through his execution, and then still forward, as you say, you still communicate with him, along with the other type of profiling work you've done, to now working with children in a hospital, or in a hospice rather, while equally and in some ways even more tragic. There's certainly a light side to that story when you're helping them spiritually. So could you tell us a little bit about that before we finish this fascinating interview?
Yes. There's a hospice here in Peoria, Illinois, and this hospice for many years only ministered to adults. And then they were here with me, with my father, just a week before my father passed, and I was with him, and he passed also. And that was an experience, because one night I saw a mist, his spirit leave his body. Mm-hmm. That was fascinating to me. After my father passed, and then I became a Benedictine monk. For 5 years, I was a Benedictine monk.
Gosh.
And that is another story in itself also. But anyhow, so this hospice reached out to me and asked me if I would volunteer with these children. And I sent you some pictures, I think, of these children and such. Mm-hmm. And so I do. And so I did. And these children, and their parents know who I am. They know that I'm a psychic medium. They know that I'm gay. They know that my Catholicism is very important to me spiritually, right? And so I would be with these children in the very last moments of their lives. I see angels, and angels would come into the rooms, and these children would see angels. I would bring stuffed bears to them. I would play my guitar. I would sing with these children. But to be with these children, the very last moments of their lives, you know, and just, you know, and my brothers and sisters who are listening to this, I always said to these children that I can only take you part of the way home. you're going to go to this wonderful, beautiful park where there's no pain, where you can run around and play soccer and football and go swimming and jump around and have fun, because most of these children were in hospitals, and like the pictures, and I can see one of the little boys is in the hospital. And if you want to show their pictures, that's fine because I have, I have permission from their families. I can use their first names, but not their last names. Okay. And so the angel would get closer and the children's heart rate would begin to fluctuate. And sometimes these children would say, Robert, do you see that in the corner? And I said, yes. Some of these angels were little kids, were children that they remembered when they were in the Shriners or at St. Jude. Okay. So sometimes the parents would see this flash of bright light, right? Some of these parents saw these angels to come towards their son or daughter, and the angel would get closer and closer and closer to them, and their heart rate would begin to fluctuate more. And that is the time, because a lot of times the little child asked me, like several of them would say, well, what took you so long? Their parents never told them I was coming, but they sent something, right? And so a lot of times the parents said, Robert, if you want to get in bed, if you want to hold my son or daughter, please do. And so I did. And these parents, let me tell you, seeing a child decline in front of your eyes for years before it happens, before they're called home, it has already taken its toll on the mom and dad. Okay, so I'm also there to help them and to assist them. And so the angels getting close. Sometimes they see a flash of bright light, so the parents have seen that also. The angels getting closer, and the child begins to change the breathing. The whole room changes, the air changes, everything changes. And so I usually get into the back, and usually I shave my eyebrows, my mustache, my hair, because a lot of the children have no hair because of the chemotherapy. And so I want them to see that I love them and that I would shave my head off. And that's okay. So these children will pat me, on their head, and they will, and so they will kiss me. And so I tell the parents to get into bed with their child and to kiss on them and to love them and tell them this is the last moment that we're able to do this physically. And so the parents will do so. But my brothers and sisters who are listening to this, to hear a woman and a father too, it is incredible. A lot of these women are not able to have a natural child again, and this is their only child, and they see their child passing in front of their eyes. It is incredible. It is very sad. It's very sorrowful, and yet I am so blessed to be with these children. I know that afterwards when I'm there, I explain to these parents that being Judeo-Christians, that we used to wash the bodies. If someone died at home, we would wash the bodies and stuff of our loved ones. And so I encourage the parents to do so, because that is one of the last things physically they could do for their child. And so a lot of times they would run a bath, and they would take their child into the bathtub, and they would bathe their child. And I always met the coroner, not the coroner, but the people from, to ask them never to put the child in a body bag, allow the parents to do that, and also never to zip the body bag up. Never do that in front of them. So the family bathes the body of their loved one, of their baby, and clothes them in a nightshirt, or it's usually in pajamas, and then put them into the enclosure. And then I encourage the parents to carry the child out to the vehicle. And so the parents do. But to hear sorrow coming from their parents, and it does affect me. Do I cry with them? Of course I do. And some people say, oh, that's so strong. It has nothing to do with being strong at all. None whatsoever. And this is the little boy. I can say his first name is Reed. And he did an event for this little boy. And 30 days later, after this event, I was with him in this next picture that I have. He's waving. And that was just taken up.
Oh, sorry.
So this is another little boy. And he was in the hospital at that time. And 2 days later, they took him home. And I was with him. And I talked to him. And such a blessing. Oh my gosh. You know, this little girl, this was just recent. Angel. She's only 5 years old. And see her head was shaved. Or not shaved, but her hair had fallen out because of chemo. And bless her soul, to be with this little angel when God called her home and be with her parents. And look how pleased. Look at that. Oh, God. But I wanted to show our brothers and sisters these pictures of these beautiful children that I have been with. And all these children are, oh my God, they're having fun. They're playing. They're having so much fun, and they're playing, and they're doing all sorts of things that they were not able to do here on this earth. So these pictures that I have will never leave my mind. Never.
Yeah, it must be incredibly devastating. As wonderful that it is that you help, I can only imagine that.
Oh yeah.
That it must just, for the parents and for you, be. It's unimaginable to me, actually, how, I mean, I've lost loved ones, but I've never lost a child loved one. That would be, I can't think of anything more devastating, to be honest. So
it is difficult for the parents. And like I said, I'm there for the parents also. But to have a lot of these parents will see the angel come themselves, right? They will experience that. And it's so neat in the psychic part of me will see the angel pick up the child and arise with them. And it's just incredible. Like I said, a lot of the parents ask me to stay afterwards. And so I'm there for the parents. And I just don't, and so I'm just not there that one day. I do some follow-up with them and such. A lot of the parents have asked me to come to the funeral. And so I'm like sitting in the front pew with them, which I'm not a family member, but they consider me family. And again, it's not all about me. It's not. I believe that God puts us where we need to be at any given time. And I truly believe that. And so I talk to their eulogy, I do a eulogy on these children at times. And it's very soothing to their parents and very helpful. And now some of the things that I do. There are many, many more.
Well, thank you for being with us tonight, Robert. We'll have to have you back on the show, because there was a lot that we didn't cover. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure Jen had dozens of questions for you as well. Is there somewhere in the meantime that our audience, if they want to follow you or see what you do, or
yeah, please. And I give my number out. The whole world calls me all the time, so I'm available. My telephone number is 309-213-0325. 309-213-0325. And my Facebook page is just Robert Righi, and you will see my profile is this beautiful waterfall that I saw when I was in Taos, New Mexico. And that's another story too about being with our native brothers and sisters on the Navajo and Hopi Indian reservation and my experience there. In fact, I just came back from the Southwest just a month ago to be home with my family here, to be as my sisters and to be as my nieces and nephews and stuff. But I will be leaving here very, very soon. Going to go back to Nebraska, being volunteering there, and then I'm going back to the Southwest, going back to New Mexico, and I'll be volunteering on another Native American area.
Oh.
Homeless shelter in Texas. So that's a whole nother story. So thank you so very much for allowing me to be on. And anytime you want me back on, please, I'm available to you. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
All the very best for the holidays and Merry Christmas. And until we talk again, keep it weird.
Thank you. God bless. Bye.
God bless you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Until then, stay safe.